So hello, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Anna from GreenGeeks, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, How to Make Your WordPress Site Accessible, presented by our guest speaker, Joe Simpson. I'm going to introduce you, Joe, in a moment, but I'm so glad to have you here. I just wanted to say real quick a couple of words about GreenGeeks for those of you who are not familiar with us and are watching us today. We're a 300% green energy web hosting provider, which essentially means we put back 3 times the power we consume into the grid in the form of renewable energy. And we have been recognized by the US EPA since 2009 as a Green Power Partner. And we offer share hosting, reseller hosting, VPS, and dedicated servers. So for the webinars today, I have a couple of things. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A, and Joe is going to answer them through the presentation. Or you're welcome to chat in the chat room. Just remember that if you want everybody to see what you're talking about, you need to select all panelists and attendees. And as always we do, we're recording this. So if you need to step away or for some reason you have to leave the webinar, don't worry, because we'll send you the recording in the next couple of days. So now I'm going to introduce from our GreenGeeks team today, we have Erica. Erica will be assisting us with the chat and the Q&A and maybe sharing some of the links of the many links that Joe is going to have in his presentation. And Erica, do you want to introduce yourself really quick to the attendees?
Thank you, Anna. Hi, Anna. Hi, Joe. Hi, everyone. My name is Erica Barbosa. I am from Costa Rica, and I work in the partners team. And I hope you enjoy today with Joe. And I'm going to be in the chat sharing some links about the presentation of today, and have fun. Thank you, Anna.
Yes, thank you, Erica. Yeah, we will have fun. So now let's introduce Joe. Joe, I met Joe probably a couple of years back at my first work camp in Orange County. And I've always admired Joe. I think he's an incredible person. And I hope that today those of you who don't know him will see what I mean. And a little bit about Joe. He was faced with a life-altering heart event in 2017, and he pivoted, focusing first on rediscovering the things he really loved and giving back to the community. So he starts working with a WordPress open source project and its community, and he immersed himself with the community and started attending WordPress meetups and WordCamps. And finally, he created his own WordPress Santa Clarita meetup and the Elementor Santa Clarita Valley meetups. And he wanted to give more to the community, so he created the WordCamp Santa Clarita. Santa Clarita being one of the fastest growing cities in LA County, in case some of you don't know where Santa Clarita is. He has been speaking and volunteering at several WordCamps in the US. And he has been learning accessibility first by attending an event by California State University called Knowbility. And also because the agency he worked for was impacted by a lawsuit, accessibility lawsuit, which required mitigation. And so this experience kind of led him to advocating for learning accessibility. And recently, Joe became a team rep on the Make WordPress accessibility team. He contributed as the volunteer wrangler for the first ever WordPress Accessibility Day 2020. He coordinating a 3-group Accessibility Day mega meetup, and he was on the organizing team for 2 full days of speakers in a dedicated track on accessibility at WordCamp Santa Clarita 2021. Joe works at Metro LA, which is one of the largest transit agencies in the world, manages a growing WordPress blog network consisting of 12 projects specific on transit news sites. And he brings expertise in user experience, search engine optimization, and accessibility to the Metro team and us. Joe is a front-end web developer, user experience developer, specializing in WordPress solutions. So welcome, Joe. Would you like to already introduced yourself, so would you like to start the presentation?
Sure. Thank you so much. Thanks to everyone who showed up today for this webinar. I appreciate the stories. Again, Anna, you know how I feel about GreenGeeks. Here in Santa Clarita, GreenGeeks is one of the first sponsors that we have for our meetup as well as our WordCamp. So GreenGeeks is always special. And when you reached out to do this presentation, I was more than honored. So this is just another way that I can give back. And I hope today with this presentation, we'll learn a little bit about accessibility. We'll share a little bit. And hopefully by the end of it, it'll have you thinking a little differently about how you work in the WordPress space and how you advocate to make things accessible. So with that, let me start my screen share. All right, so hopefully everyone can see that. Yes?
Yes.
All right. We're all getting a little bit older. This became very, very apparent to me. I'm no longer a young person. And once I passed 45, things began to happen that had never happened to me before. I began to get injured to a point where I needed to have surgical procedures. I broke my ankle. I had arthroscopic surgery on my knee. I tore ligaments in my wrist. And in 2017, as Anna mentioned at the top, I had a heart event. Now, why do I show you all of these scars? I show them to you because at points during each injury, I couldn't work. In the state of California, I was disabled. With 2 of these events, I was disabled for more than 3 months. And what that taught me was, it was very difficult for me because I was so used to doing things on my own. When I tore the ligaments in my wrist, I discovered how difficult it was to use certain sites to order online, to order groceries, things as simple as that. We all had to make changes a few years back when the pandemic hit. This is a photo of a local place that I love. I love ramen and I love going to this place, but like this place and so many others around the world, they were forced to close because a lot of these companies, in addition to having to deal with the pandemic, they didn't have an option to do online business, to offer curbside or pickup because their websites weren't set up to function that way. And what that led to a lot of people experiencing in terms of the frustration, the anger, the despair, the inability to do basic things. We were all exposed. We had a little glimpse into how our friends and loved ones that have a disability sometimes have in terms of how they interact with technology, how they order online, how difficult it is for them. So the last 2 years have been really eye-opening for a lot of folks. And it's brought a lot of awareness to accessibility and making your sites accessible. Today, I want to present how to make your WordPress website accessible. I always start with a few slides like this. And what I'm going to do is talk to you about some numbers at the beginning, do a little bit of interactive work, share a little bit, do a little bit of interactivity, and then at the end, hopefully have you on board, have you as an advocate, show you why it's important for you to make things accessible. This is a chart that I love to share. I saw Sumner Davenport present this chart back at WordCamp Santa Clarita. I also saw a gentleman in Vegas talk about something similar, but I love to present this because in the previous slide, there were so many large companies that have been dinged for accessibility. If we take a step back, let me do that. Yeah, so Amtrak, all sectors of American business, food, education, entertainment, they've all been dinged because their sites weren't considered accessible and open to all. Most recently, or more famously, Domino's was the most recent. They challenged all the way to the Supreme Court and lost. So the reason I share that with you is that in addition to these large companies being dinged, smaller and smaller businesses are being affected in the same way as I mentioned in the pandemic. These sites that aren't accessible are being highlighted and called out for their inability to be accessible. Look at these numbers. Way back in 2005, the numbers were really small. But as you can see over the past three plus years, it's gone up exponentially to where last year it was 25, 23. So let's start with the definition. I always do this. The way that I usually present is, I love to give you some information up front. Those slides that I just showed you, I consider those my scared straight slides, but what's a disability? Just so that we have the typical or the traditional definition, this is what a disability is. A disability is a condition of the body or mind that makes it more difficult for the person with that condition to do certain activities and interact with the world around them. What is accessibility? Accessibility is how to measure how accessible the system is to all people, not just you or me. We tend, like for instance, I don't have any things that cause me to have difficulties when I interact with technology. Here, and again, here's the definition. What is Wacag? A lot of times in the web world, you hear that term thrown around. It's a set of guidelines created. It's a set of recommendations on how to make your website more accessible, primarily for people with disabilities. But the one thing I always try to stress is that when you make your site more accessible for people with disabilities, you make them more accessible to everyone. Don't you want to make the work that you do more successful? Don't you want to make it the site faster? Don't you want more people to look at your products and services or your clients' products and services? Who doesn't want more traffic? Who doesn't want more money, more profits? So making your site more accessible is logical, unless you don't like money. Here's a little bit of the history of when it was published. It was published back in 2008. It's been updated from time to time, and it became a final recommendation in 2018. Okay, what does accessibility mean? During my presentation, I'll take a couple of breaks so we can do a little bit of interactivity. Here's our first quiz. So in the chat, what does A11Y mean? Does it mean A, a friend or an ally? Does it mean allied forces? Does it mean accessibility, or D, all of the above? So take a moment, put it in the chat, and we'll take a look at that. All right. And the answer is C, accessibility. A11Y is it's a shortening. That means there's 11 letters between the A and Y in accessibility. It's something that you'll see as a hashtag. You'll see it referred to a lot in literature or people that care deeply about accessibility. Why should accessibility matter to you? The reason, if you're here today, it's a great start, and I'm so glad to have you. That means that you're at least willing to listen and to learn, and hopefully in turn, you'll take what you learned today, take it out into the world and make a difference. There's a report that comes out once a year, comes out each February from WebAIM, a group in Idaho, I believe. They conduct an evaluation of 1 million homepages for the accessibility. Now, they use a certain number of resources, which are mentioned here, to build this list. But the thing that's really startling and why it should make you care about accessibility is the next slide, which is not that great. Did you know when they did this report, over 97.4% of the homepages had detectable WCAG failures? That's amazing. That's a high number. That means almost 2% passed and the rest failed out of all the sites that they looked at. That's an incredible number. Of these million pages, over 51 million had distinct accessibility errors. That's like 51.4 errors per page. That's incredible. Just think of every homepage that you see, all the widgets and things that are floating around and images and text. There are these many errors on each page on average. Users with a disability, they're expected to encounter detectable errors 1 out of every 17 elements. So as a screen reader works down a page, they may run into an error 1 every 17 elements. That's disheartening. That's really scary. But on the other hand, as someone that works in WordPress, that builds websites for a living, or hope to build websites for a living, that's an incredible market for you to tackle. That's an area, or, you know, a lot of times in the WordPress community, you hear people talk about carving out their niche or finding their niche. If there's this many websites that need to be addressed in terms of accessibility, that's a niche that you can carve out and make lots and lots of money. Imagine that skill set being added to your tool chest. Here's more of a breakdown from year to year. You can see the numbers have deviated a little bit, either gone up or gone down a little bit. But I wanted to show you the different areas, because we're going to talk a little bit about some of these areas in terms of how you can address them and make your WordPress site accessible. But in the left column, it shows sort of the areas where some of these types of failures are. It defines what those are, and it tells you the percentages of the home pages that contain those. So you can see, for instance, alt text is in the high 60s, almost 70%. That's something that anybody that's done HTML or built web pages over the last 25 years, everyone knows what alt text is, but almost everyone ignores it. We just built a site at our company, and once we launched, it was amazing that if I didn't say, hey, wait, we need to make sure these images have accessibility, alt text, people they take it for granted. They don't even address it. So hopefully when we finish this presentation, you'll see that there's little things. And again, my presentations are always geared towards a beginner. New people into WordPress, I have an affinity for those folks. I love to see those people solve their initial problems and make those exponential steps in learning and creating amazing things. So just think, if you could touch on these 6 or 7 categories when you're building your site, it'll make such a big difference. What are some common mistakes? A lot of people ignore those easy fixes, like alt tags. A lot of folks are using video on their TikTok, social media, on their web pages, but they don't include transcripts or live captions. There's so many small things that we could do. They don't address color contrast, things like that. They design without the end user in mind. A lot of times, a client will sketch out their logo or a web design on a piece of a napkin. They don't really even think about who's going to use a site. They build it for themselves or what they like. A lot of designers, I used to be a designer in another life. I know how that mindset works, where, you know, we come up with a solution and we, like a sailboat that we built, we just put it in the water and watch it float away and admire how pretty it is. But we don't really think about, how is somebody going to interact with those pages? How are they going to execute our call to action? How are they going to find what we want them to find, or find what they want to find as easily as possible? They often address accessibility at the very end of their project or not at all. Now, how many of us would build a house and then think, oh, we need to lay a foundation? How many of us work backwards? No, generally, in everything that we do, we plan it out. We think about how it's going to go. But a lot of times when we're designing sites, we have a certain formula we like to work on. A number of times I've worked on projects where we'll hear the title of it, we'll hear, read the project brief, and even before we finish talking about some of the basics, people are giving us imagery and ideas of what they think it should look like. That's really not thinking about the user. We all assume that we don't have time for accessibility. I've given a few accessibility talks in the WordPress community, and when I saw someone that was really dynamic at a West Hills meetup, she's on the line today. When I saw her speaking, I was sitting next to this woman who got so much anxiety or so upset about what she was hearing about accessibility. It chuckles me but it was a little startling. She turned and she punched me in the shoulder because she's like, oh, accessibility makes me so frustrated. Or I remember another time I was at the downtown Los Angeles meetup. No, at WordCamp Long Beach. And there was a gentleman who was, I kept seeing him out of the corner of my eye, and he was just giving me the most evil eye when I was talking about accessibility. You know, he felt like my clients aren't gonna wanna hear this. They're not gonna want me to go back and redo the work that I've already done. Why should I have to do this? If you build it if you build in or fold in accessibility as you build a site, it'll be much easier. And then the other thing that I would say 99%, I shouldn't say 99%. There's a really, really large number of folks that don't test anything. Once you push that site live, it's go time. But leading up to that, you should test your site. You should bring in people with disabilities to test your site. You should bring in people to achieve certain tasks. Find this, find that. See how people interact with your work before you launch it. Wouldn't that be the best time to make changes? Instead of at the end, or get complaints from someone online like, this doesn't work, this link doesn't work, this doesn't make sense. Build it into your process. And I don't know if we'll have time for it. At the very end of my slides, I added a couple bonus slides, but there's a really evil quick fix out there right now. I'm not even gonna mention it. You'll see it in the corner of a lot of web pages. These companies tell you that that makes your site accessible, but it absolutely doesn't. It creates so many more problems. The largest names in the accessibility community speak out against it. Joe Dolson, Joe Dolson spoke out about it. He's on the accessibility team for WordPress. There was a number of people felt so strongly about it in the WordPress community that they circulated a ballot or a petition last year. So avoid that. And again, I'm not even going to give it any credence by mentioning the names, but avoid the quick fixes. So I always hope to give you a few tools and takeaways from my presentations. We learned a little bit about some things to avoid. And if some of those bullets apply to you, let's just think about how we can fix those, how we can change our habits to make sure that what we're doing is accessible. With color, test early. I used to work with someone, and she was on our marketing team. She was a project manager. And no matter what it was, it had to have magenta as part of it. Whether it was something that someone had to read, something. And a lot of times, these colors that we choose, or these colors that we love, or these colors that make us feel a certain way, don't provide sufficient contrast. There are so many of us that may have color blindness issues. They can't even see what we're putting on our page if it doesn't address that. Content is easier to see and hear when color is not used as the only way to convey information. In one of the presentations that I do, I show like a chart, and it's built with colors and color bars and things like that. But for someone that's colorblind, they'll see all the bars as the similar color. I show a picture when the NFL did those color rush uniforms of, there was a Monday night game between the Bills and the Jets. One team had all red uniforms on, one team had all green on. And I showed you how someone with color blindness would see the two teams. All of the jerseys, the grass, everything looked gray. So those geniuses who came up with the idea in New York and took it to the NFL offices and said, hey, this is a great idea, we'll sell millions of jerseys. Or even now, you'll notice like the coaches are wearing hats with a black hats with a black logo, which doesn't make sense. It looks cool, but it doesn't make sense because it's the only way to convey information. And someone with color blindness or having trouble seeing that can't distinguish that that's a logo on the hat. The default foreground and background colors and the combinations therein should provide sufficient contrast. This is something that we see quite a bit as well. Try to avoid that and make sure you test your colors. And again, in a second, I'll show you how to do that. This is one of the tools that I always recommend. There's quite a few that are out there. This is a web and color contrast analyzer. And the great thing about it, you just enter your foreground and background colors, and it'll tell you if it meets a sufficient ratio. These little green buttons or pills will pop up, whether you pass or fail. It also shows you, and a lot of folks, when we design, we don't design for the different size of the text. So color contrast has to happen at a smaller text size because that's what we're reading, and that's probably most important. And then the next level, which is, you know, the larger text and so on, even the form fields and things like that, you can test. It also has a link contrast checker, which is important. In one of my other presentations, we talk about, there was a design trend, and I'm hoping it really goes away. But it was really in vogue to have gray hyperlinks that were like a medium gray or even lighter than a medium gray without an underline. So someone that couldn't, you know, and it wasn't sufficient contrast. So someone reading that page would see it all as black, or maybe see it and wouldn't know that it's a link because it didn't have text underlined or have sufficient contrast. So there's a lot of little things that we can do. There's a link at the bottom of the page. And again, I'll make these slides available to everyone, but I always like to provide some slides so that you can click through and demo some of the stuff that we see here. Here are some color contrast resources. And I know Anna mentioned at the beginning that Erica would pop some of that into the chat. So we can do that as well, but just also know that I'll provide a link to the slides at the very end that you can grab online right now. The next thing, here's some takeaways or things that we can do right away. Use alternative text. Don't be lazy about it. A lot of times we'll upload a whole bunch of images, or however you work, you may not want to go back and do it. Add alternative text as you work. You know, this is how screen readers announce, you know, they announce alternative text in place of the images. How many of you have seen the red X or turn your images off when in development mode? The alternate text appears when the image doesn't. So it helps someone with a screen reader or with visual or certain cognitive disabilities to perceive the content and the function of the images. Sometimes images don't serve a function, maybe a background image or something like that. So it helps the person that's using that page determine if that image is important, what's the context in relation to how it's used on the page. So it's very important to use alternative text. And like I mentioned, if an image fails to load or a user has blocked images, the alternative text will be displayed instead. Also, another benefit, again, we talked about the benefits of accessibility in your WordPress site. The more text and content that you have on that page. Do you remember the days when people built websites with large images, or they felt like, hey, the logo or certain text needs to be crisp, so they made a big graphic out of text? That's not usable to an SEO search engine. So using alternative text actually helps your page with indexing and search SEO ranking. Who doesn't want their sites to rank better? All right, here's our next interactive part of the presentation. This information that you see in the box. So for instance, at Metro, we're building projects. A lot of times there's there's steps or stages to every project. So say we're extending light rail into the San Fernando Valley. They'll do studies, they'll do some public outreach, they'll do an environmental impact report. We'll put that online. Then they'll commence groundbreaking, construction, operation. It goes through these different stages. All right, so imagine this gray box is on a web page with this link, download the environmental impact, and an icon for a PDF. Now, the PDF isn't part of the link. So when you see this on a page, what should the alternative text be? Should it be A, environmental impact report? Should it be B, PDF? Should it be C, PDF icon? Or should it be D, the content of the image is presented in the proper context, so it should be an empty alt tag? All right, I'll give you a couple seconds to answer that question. Now, folks that have seen this presentation, I know a couple of folks have been online. Again, this is sort of the beginner's presentation on accessibility. I mixed it up because I knew we may get some people that have done it before, because this one is an interesting answer. All right, put it in the chat. Let me know whether you think it's A, B, C, or D. Let me just check the chat here. All right, so we have a couple of folks that said C. All right, and the answer is oops, I jumped too fast. It is B. The reason it's that is because it's not a link and you want to describe it. Everyone knows that it's an icon. So that's something that's assumed, so we don't need to add icons. So that's where it was sort of a trick question. It should be PDF because that sort of describes what it is. You don't need to put icon because everyone is familiar with icons nowadays. All right. Here's our next one. If you have seen my presentations in the past, I always highlight some of my favorite authors. So imagine this on a web page, except for the title. You have Terry McMillan's photo, her name with her occupation, and then this brief blurb below it. What should the alternative text be for that? Should it be A, image? Should it be B, Terry McMillan? Or should it be C, it should be empty? Because it's provided enough context to the image with the text around it that you don't have to put anything. All right, let me know what your answer is. All right. The answer is C, empty. It provides enough information that you don't need an alternative text. Again, she's known for Waiting to Exhale, a few other books as well. That actually, Waiting to Exhale was made into a movie with Angela Bassett. All right, here are some alternative text resources. Again, WebAIM has some great information, and these examples were taken from that site and sort of updated and zhuzhed up. But the great thing about that site, and again, I'm totally for if you're involved with our community or if you've heard me talk, I'm big on free resources. Now, there are times when you need to invest, but as a beginner, a lot of times we often get overwhelmed when we're trying to learn something, or we bite off a little more than we chew. We can chew. We try to do something a little more advanced. We often run into roadblocks that stop us from making progress. So I always say start with the easy, the free stuff, and then once you level up, then you can invest and go to the next level. So they have some great resources that show you some real world examples, because a lot of times for so many years, people were doing alt text wrong for images. They would just, if it was a picture of a woman, they would say, this is a picture of Gladys, without any context, or doesn't really tell you what that image means in the context of how it appears on that page. So they give you some real world examples, as well as a lot of great learning activities to follow along. The next tip or takeaway is start with accessible themes. A lot of time, as I mentioned, we're more enamored with how it's going to look. We have a certain way we want our website to look. We want to build to a lot of times you'll get a client that says, hey, I love the Amazon site, build me one just like it. And so then you go out and you look for something that sort of matches and you build based on that. Again, we want to build for the user's needs. We want to test, but we want to start with an accessible theme first. How many of you know whether the theme that you currently use is considered accessibility ready? Did you know that both on the WordPress.org and the WordPress.com theme sites, the theme repositories have themes that are built with accessibility in mind? Accessibility ready themes can only garner that tag if they've passed the accessibility audit. We'll talk a little bit more about the details that are involved to make it accessibility ready in the next couple of slides. But there's also a lot of folks go with premium themes, or they go to do a Google search. If it's not in the repository of the accessibility ready, they may call it accessible or accessibility ready. It's not. Go with the repository, because you know it meets certain standards. The example I like to give is, I used to drive a Honda for 20 years. Never broke down, was very reliable. But when it broke down, or if I had to change a tire, I took it to the dealer that was authorized. I didn't take it to a mom and pop shop. They could probably do the same quality work, but I know if it's authorized, their work is guaranteed for a certain amount. I didn't want to worry about it. So when you decide on a theme, why not choose something that has accessibility ready already built in when you start? Because again, we want to think about accessibility from the beginning. All right. All right. To become accessibility ready, it's got to meet all these bullet points. And again, I'll leave these up for a second. And if you'll notice, when you get these slides, just go back and take a look. The 1 million, the million sites report, it listed a lot of these in that table that we're missing. So these accessibility ready themes have that built into the themes already, so that as you build, it's a great place to start, knowing that you have a lot of this stuff baked in and ready for you to access and utilize and leverage. Now, it doesn't mean that once you get this theme and you build something that you don't need to test, that you don't need to make sure that things are in order, but it just gives you, again, like the Honda dealer, it gives you a certain level of assurance that it's starting in a good place. Right? This is, if you want to read more details on the accessibility ready process, take a look at this link. It talks about the handbook, what it takes to become accessibility ready, how they review it, the things that they recommend. And the great thing about these pages that are in the codex and the handbook is that they give you a lot of links that jump off to things that they recommend you look at as well. So a lot of these are also free. They're also great resources on learning. Okay, here is the WordPress.org theme page. So as you can see, at the very top, it has a filter area. And once you click on the feature filter, this box jumps open. And then you have a number of different features that the theme will have, or the theme will possess. So a lot of times, just go ahead and click the accessibility ready. It tells you that there's 105 themes in the repository on WordPress.org that meet the accessibility ready criteria. And again, as you can see, it has a whole bunch of diversity in terms of look and feel. It has some with a large image at the, the Megatron at the top. Some of them are more text oriented. They have a blank theme that's there as well. So take a look there. And again, start with this and then start building from there. Number 4, test your work constantly. I can't say it enough, because again, I feel like this is the area that people really need to work on. A lot of times we'll work on something to hit the deadline. We won't have testing built into that milestone or into those milestones, or even broach it with our client. But again, it's important to test your work, because again, we often make assumptions about who's going to use our site, how they're going to use it. There are great tools out there. Like for instance, we use Hotjar, and Hotjar allows you to see how people move around your page with heat maps, and you can actually do screen recording, so you can see how people interact with your page. And that's mind blowing. I did one of the sites that I built this summer was for our art team. And when they saw the recordings, they couldn't believe, like there's one person that wanted to have videos on every page that take up 3/4 or 80% of the window, pushing all the important text about the artist off the page. And she couldn't believe that people immediately scrolled up and started interacting with the text. Testing allows you to make informed decisions about your website design. And again, just get started. Don't feel like you'll be overwhelmed or if you've got too much to do. There's a lot of steps along the way that you can blend in some testing. A wireframe is sort of a form of testing. When you do rough ideas on your WordPress site at the beginning, and you show these wireframes or sketches to your client, they can say, oh, move things around, or you can do a lot of initial footwork. That's a form of testing. There are also some great browser-based tools that can help you test your site. I'll share one with you here, but there's a number that are free. There's some that are paid, that are worthwhile if you're going to do this for a living or incorporate it as part of your skill set. But there's tools that are out there that could do a quick test. It'll tell you, just like there's tests to test your site on speed, there's tools that allow you to test the accessibility of your site as well. I already mentioned conduct user testing and gather data and feedback that helps you make informed decisions. Right. In the WordPress repository, the plugin repository, I mentioned Joe Dolson at the beginning. He's a mentor of mine. He's the leader of the WordPress accessibility team that I'm now a member of. He's been an incredibly strong voice in the community. Like I mentioned, locally here in Santa Clarita, Sumner has been the leading voice on pushing us ahead in accessibility. Joe Dolson wrote some really important accessibility plugins that you may want to consider. The WP accessibility plugin is in the repository. It's free. It'll do some of the basic testing. It'll do some basic things that'll help you get an idea of what you're doing on your WordPress site as you're building along the way, and point out some ways that you can fix that if you need to. Here's a URL for that. Again, the PDF will contain these links, as well as they're being popped in by Erica. Thank you so much, Erica. You're awesome. So these are, again, great tools for you to use as you build your site. Here's an online tool, Accessibility Insights. It's a great tool. It'll allow you to put your URL in, and then it'll run some tests, and it'll give you a report. And I believe you can export the report, or in the worst case scenario, you can still just show it to your client as well as, and sort of describe some of the issues that the tool finds that you have to fix in order to make sure you meet the WCAG guidelines. Here's an example. I did a run on the National Geographic site, and it tells you right off the bat, there are 70 failed instances. And remember, at the beginning, the Million Websites report talked about failed instances. And again, these are, as it went through the page and it checked everything, it said, oh, this page has, just this one page has 70 errors. And it sort of lists what those errors are. And when you pop open the chevron, it'll tell you more details about it, so you can find it in the code and figure out how to address it as well. As you can see, it talks about button name, color contrast, image alt text. So a lot of the things that we've talked a little bit about in this presentation, it'll give you a heads up on what you need to work on. All right. And finally, get involved. Make change today. Like I said, if we address color contrast, if we do alt text, if we find accessibility ready themes and plugin tools to use, test our sites, we're making substantial changes today. By ignoring it, you're in the 98%. By addressing it, we're carving out our niche. Learn as much as you can. There's a lot of great resources. I don't have time today, but LinkedIn Learning, edX, Nobility has some great resources. There's certifications that you can do. Learn as much as you can, because again, this adds value. And again, there's a big niche. Just imagine if you did 1 million websites, how much money you'd have. Learn by doing to apply your knowledge. Maybe at the beginning, you don't feel totally confident or totally sure about offering this as a service. Work on it along the way, and then at the end, tell your client about it, and then your next client, try it out, and then incorporate it into your work process. learn by contributing to WordPress accessibility. As I mentioned, and as I was introduced at, when I was introed at the beginning, it mentioned that I'm a team rep on the WordPress accessibility team. I know a lot of folks that know me. Part of my journey is I'm trying to figure out what's next for me. After I had the heart event, I know I wanted to give back, but I didn't know how. You know, a lot of where we are today is because of the patterns that we've sort of built into our lives. That, you know, we react a certain way based on how we've interacted with the world. And I was trying to figure out what was next. And the last 5 years, I've met so many people, I've done so many different things, but I want to make an impact. I don't know how, but my next challenge is trying to be a part of making a change to WordPress from the inside. So I joined the WordPress Make team, and these are the folks that build accessibility into WordPress in general at the highest level. So I want to get in and learn. I want to contribute. I'm also working on my certification. I hope to have that in the next year. So I want to contribute from the inside. And that may not be what's in it for you. But again, just by incorporating this, what I've talked to you about today, into the work that you're doing, you're making a change in the community as well. WordPress is open source, which is great. That means you can steer the direction of where WordPress is going to go. Especially now in the last couple of years, since everything's gone remote, so many folks in the community have sort of taken a step back, and rightfully so. The world is going through something really incredible right now, but it's offered an opportunity for people that want to get involved to get in right now and make an impact. So I urge you to join us. So WordPress accessibility team meets on Fridays on the Slack channel. I'll share some information about that soon as well. Here are some resources for WordPress accessibility: the accessibility handbook, theme requirements, the developer's handbook. Again, these are the things that will tell you what it takes if you're interested in building themes, for example. That was one thing I mentioned. I want to learn how to build a theme, but now we're shifting the block, so I have to relearn what I thought I knew so I can try to build a theme. But that's sort of on my bucket list. So these options are for people that want to do that. Also a free learning resources on WordPress TV. I always pitch that. As was mentioned in my intro earlier, Sumner Davenport led our team this year for WordCamp Santa Clarita, and we had a focus on accessibility. For the first time at a WordCamp, there wasn't just one or two accessibility talks sprinkled in. There was a full track both days. We had, I think, 15 speakers that were all talking about accessibility. So those videos are up on WordPress TV, as well as all the accessibility talks that have been recorded for other WordCamps around the world. So that's a great learning resource as well. So I always urge folks to take a look at that. The Make WordPress team is on Twitter at WP Accessibility. Follow us there. If you want to learn about accessibility in a meetup format. Now, meetups are great. Meetups, for those that haven't been to a meetup, it's 1 to 3 hours of information that's put on by organizers in the community on various topics. So I would urge you to follow these WordPress accessibility meetups. And actually the bottom two are just accessibility meetups in general. The first two focus on WordPress. And at the time I made this slide, I didn't update the title, but the second one, they've changed the title of their meetup, but they're still doing great work. And they do something that's awesome. You can get credit towards your certification. You have the ability to learn from someone that's a professional in the industry, and then they do hands-on work. So if you want to learn by doing, that's a great meetup as well. Here's some more information about Make. Again, you can contribute not only to accessibility, there's a number of different areas, but of course, I recommend you join the team with me on accessibility. That's the URL there. Again, it's all, everything about, in terms of WordPress, again, it's open source. So that means people like you and me donate their time or volunteer their time and effort to make WordPress better. So join us as volunteers and let's make a difference in terms of accessibility, where it's going to go in the next years. Matt Mullingweg is going to have the State of the Word on December 14th. And that's always a great way for you to hear about what's happened in WordPress in the last year, what's going to happen in the coming years in terms of changes. So again, these are opportunities for you to find out what's next for you, to get involved and do more to contribute. I'll leave you with this. I've used this quote a few times, but now that it's been impacted by the Million Reports project by WebAIM, the WebAIM Million, it's more appropriate than ever. Small acts, when multiplied by millions of people, can transform the world. We're going to tweak that a little bit in honor of what we're talking about today, to say small acts, when multiplied by millions of accessible websites, can transform the world. Thank you for joining me today. Again, my name is Joe Simpson. Thanks to GreenGeeks for having me. You'll see me around the community, not in real person, not as a real person yet, but virtually on this screen here. We'll interact. You can find me, and well, you can find these slides at GreenGeeks-ally on bit.ly. Oops, let me leave that up for a second. Oh, there you go.
Thank you, Joe.
All right.
There's a question from Summer in the Q&A.
Okay. All right. Oh, you can find me here. These are all my. Okay. All right. Let me. Okay. Can you? Oh, let me see if I can find it. Oh. Hi, Renee. Renee is. And again, this is great because, oops, I'm just zooming through stuff. My screen share. All right. So let me go back to the chat. And again, as I look here, do not see it. Is it near the bottom?
Oh, it's in the Q&A, Joe. It's in the Q&A, not in the chat.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Okay. Where do I accept the captions?
Oh, Q&A. I can read it for you.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. If someone doesn't personally know, I'm sorry. See, I'm a technology person and I totally botched that one. I'm sorry. I just spent 3 minutes of everyone's time. If someone doesn't personally know anyone who's disabled, where can they find persons with disability to natively test their site? For us, and again, I'll do a little more research, but for us, you may find someone in your own company. At Metro, for example, we're one of the largest transportation agencies in the country. So in our headquarters, there are 1,000 people in our building, and we have an accessibility advisory committee. So when we did testing way back one time, I went and I made a plea to the group. I sort of gave them an overview of what we were working on, and we asked for volunteers. We put up surveys on our site asking for folks to help. So check within your company first. You can also check, I think if you reach out to some of the organizations, they may be able to help you as well. Again, I'll take a look and see if I can find something else. But again, it's always good to look, or you can, if you have family or friends, that you can ask them that way. It doesn't have to be formal. A lot of people think that when you do testing, you have to have experts. You just have to have people with the experience or with the characteristics that you need. I shouldn't say characteristics, but you should look for someone with disability that's willing to help. It doesn't have to be a particular, you probably want to test with a number of different types of accessibility challenges. Not just, a lot of times when we think of accessibility, we think of people interacting with the keyboard. What if they have visual impairments, or if they have motor skill impairments? So you need to have a variety of people that test. Thank you, Sumner.
That was a great question, Summer. That's a good point. Do we have any other questions from, and hi, Marco.
Oh, hey, Marco.
We have
Hey, Joe.
a guest, a special guest.
Sorry.
Oh, that's no problem. I know. Maybe were you swimming today?
No, today was a holiday, so I kind of botched it. I was like, I need to see this presentation for two reasons. One, because it's you, and two, because I'm really interested in the subject.
Oh, awesome. And I know
Yeah.
for those that are on the line today, these presentations are on their YouTube channel as well. I know in the build up to this, I went back and watched all the webinars to make sure I was on my P's and Q's, but it's a great resource also. So make sure you check it there. I know there was a couple of questions about getting the presentation at a later time or seeing the video as well.
I do have a question.
Oh, sure.
Actually,
Sure.
Yeah, you're ready for me. Okay, my first question is, do you think all the accessibility issues that you run into a site, does this fall into the developer's responsibilities, or do you think there should be someone who's dedicated towards that and doing all the necessary changes that need to be done, especially when the site is not accessible ready?
Well, it's sort of a two-pronged question. I mean, there's some things that you could fix on the front end. Like I mentioned, the things that I was talking about are a lot of the easier things. I shouldn't say easier things, but the things that you can do through your WordPress admin dashboard. You know, you can add alt text. You can, if you're using 2021, and I should probably, well, I don't have time to, but if you're using 2021, in the back end, it allows you to see, it doesn't let you pick like if you're choosing a background color, for instance, it doesn't let you pick a color that's not the proper contrast. It does it dynamically. So those are tools on the front end that anybody can sort of use. But if you're using a plugin that was built by a developer, if you have to make tweaks, then that's probably something the developer is going to have to use. So it just depends on what it is. We worked on a project as a team last year, and there was a glitch in the menu. That's probably something that you're probably going to have to go in and tweak as a developer. So it's certain things.
Okay. My next question is monetary. Do you think one as a freelancer should charge more to have your website accessibility ready, or do you think it's just another skill set that can be incorporated into the services that you offer?
I think that's a trick question.
It is.
Because I think if you have a skill set that's more valuable, shouldn't what you offer as a service be more valuable?
Okay.
I mean, I think it should be part of your standard package, but your package shouldn't be, it adds value that it's quantifiable too. If you if you have the proper structure for your WordPress site in terms of how semantic it is, how you'll have 1H1 and how you use your other headings and things like that, that'll make your site easier to digest for SEO engines. It'll make it rank higher. That equals dollars, right? The higher you rank, the more. So yeah, so it's sort of what happened first, the chicken or the egg? I mean, we all need to charge more for our services, but this is something that you can go back to your client who says, hey, why do I need to pay for that? Don't you want to rank higher? Don't you want your site to load faster? I mean, loading fast is like the last couple of years was like a catchphrase. You know, we needed to get our sites loading within a second. Don't we want that to happen? Mm-hmm. So by making it more accessible, writing cleaner code, that's going to happen if you have an eye on accessibility. So it's sort of that's a trick question.
It is.
I do think you should earn more. I do think
you
should earn more, and I do think it should be part of your standard package.
And my last question is easy. Did you say ARC?
ARC?
At one point during the presentation, ARC?
Like no, it was ARC. Like if you travel our system in Los Angeles, they set aside 1% of the construction budget to have artwork at every station. Oh, so, art. Okay. Yes. Okay. So we have sort of a catalog of all of the artwork that's in the system on a website. So again, that person, and I think you joined us late. One of my references was to a former colleague in marketing who had to have magenta in every project that she worked on because that was her favorite color. The person in Metro Art, she wanted a video. No matter what the design was, I want a video on every page kind of thing, which doesn't really make sense when we looked at some of the data on how people use the page. So it was just to say, some people have a lot of things that we have patterns, or we have things that we feel like we need on every project. which could impact accessibility, usability, and things of that nature.
Okay.
Thanks, Joe. We're running out of time, but we have a couple of more questions. If you can
sure.
take a look in it from Ron and John.
Okay. All right. Do you know of any good tools for testing, perhaps, that record testers in video and keystroke or mouse movements? I'll have to look that one up, Ron. I'm at the beginning of my journey, so I know back when I did it, again, I did mention that Hotjar does some screen recording, so you can see it that way. Back when we did some user testing, we recorded with video cameras and things like that, and we observed them doing it. So I didn't have anything traditionally. As I mentioned, the next phase in this journey for me is becoming certified. And one of the certification tracks is on how to use tools to do testing and things of that nature. So I'll have a better answer for you in about a year. And actually, I know you personally, so I'll look up that answer and I'll get it to you personally. John Douglas Hall, thank you again, John, for being with us. Is there an aspect of accessibility arrangement that includes socially acceptability word choice on the site, sensitivity only of handicaps, but also social mores? Anybody offering a site that addresses this kind of issue? Language can turn away some people also, especially in divided times. Wow, that's a great question, John. I would say a lot of these things, a lot of these tools that I talked about today will do a lot of tangible things that you could test. Like, for instance, is your font as readable as it should be? Does items on your page have certain contrast? Now, the tone and whether it's socially acceptable or not, I don't know if that's something that you can really test for in terms of its accessibility. That's a tough one. Yeah, I'm not sure if there is a tool that does it from that perspective. I think that is more of a subjective thing. I think how much text you have, how readable it is. I mean, those things can improve how your information is digested, but I don't know if there's a tool that does that. And again, I'll open it up to the floor if someone has an answer to that.
Thanks.
But that's a great question. Thank you so much, John.
Do we have any other questions for Joe? I don't see anything else. Joe, if someone wants to get in touch with you, what is the best way?
At the end of the slide deck, you can find me on any of the social media channels, Joe Simpson Jr. So if you're on Gmail, Joe Simpson Jr. at Gmail, Facebook / Joe Simpson Jr., LinkedIn / Joe Simpson Jr. So I could be found that way. You can find me. Our meetup meets on Saturdays, and it's WordPress Santa Clarita Valley, so WordPress SCV. I think Meetup / WordPress SCV. We do an Elementor meetup as well, which is more page builder focused. I wouldn't really urge that in this setting. Page builders have some issues in terms of accessibility. So for me, part of the reason why I'm doing the Elementor stuff is I want to try to get involved with improving accessibility through that page builder tool. So I would suggest starting with the WordPress meetup or reaching out to me directly.
Great, thank you so much. I don't see any other questions, and I'm gonna let everybody go.
All right, everyone enjoy your lunch. Thank you, Anna, Marco, and Erica for having me, and give thanks to Trey. Again, GreenGeeks is awesome, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to everyone today.
Thank you to everybody for attending, and we'll see you at the next webinars. Keep following us. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Anna and Marco.
Yeah.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.